everyone. I hope you all are having a great week so far. We're going to go ahead and kick it off with organizational updates. Just going to mention that there will be no housing call next week. If you celebrate Thanksgiving, I hope you have a great Thanksgiving or just a great time off if you get those days off. We will be back the following week, which will be Tuesday, December 3rd. Moving on to federal updates. On Wednesday last week, Republicans secured the seats that are needed to retain control of the House. So this means that in the new year, Republicans will officially control both chambers of Congress as well as the White House. I was in DC last week convening with state and tribal partners that are also part of the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. So I will be providing some additional highlights and takeaways, just reflecting on my time in DC there in the days to come in this week's Housing Matters. Yesterday, the Biden-Harris administration requested nearly $100 billion in emergency disaster funding. This request includes $40 million to replenish FEMA's disaster recovery fund and $12 million for the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery, or CDBG-DR, funding. Congress is also expected to release a draft disaster recovery spending bill in early December and vote on it before they leave for the holidays. Moving on to state updates. There is a lot of state updates to get through, so bear with me. Yesterday, on November 18th, the Joint Legislative Commission on Governmental Operations Subcommittee on Hurricane Response and Recovery met to discuss North Carolina's hurricane recovery efforts, as well as the future of those efforts. Here are just a few takeaways that I want to lift up from that hearing. So we learned that in late October, the General Assembly was notified of a budget shortfall that the North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency has after they did an operational review. And that shortfall in late October was about $175 million. After a more in-depth accounting review, the funding gap grew, and ultimately the ask by INCOR is $265 million in funding in order for them to move forward with their homeowner recovery program without interruption for the about 1,400 homes that are remaining in the queue at various stages of the process. This funding ask in particular also includes about $46 million that was on the table as an option to be removed from 5 different low-income housing tax credit developments in Eastern North Carolina, but were not removed. Those projects were paused. Again, it was an option on the table. We also learned that they're spending about $2.1 million a month in temporary housing relocation assistance. And throughout the hearing, which was about 2 hours long, several members asked about the process at INCOR, what they've done differently, as well as if they should be trusted with money and resources for Hurricane Helene moving forward. The members on the subcommittee from Western North Carolina communicated that they want to wrap up the Matthew and Florence recovery in order to begin moving forward with Hurricane Helene recovery, particularly, because the storm was about 3 to 4 times worse. And so that sort of dire need was lifted up several times in the hearing. The General Assembly is also convening today, November 19th at noon, and will likely convene again today, where they're expected to vote on Senate Bill 382, the Disaster Recovery Act of 2024, Part 3. It's really important for us to mention that this is not really a disaster recovery bill. There's not a lot in this bill by way of disaster recovery. We received a draft this morning of what they might be voting on today, and here's what we know so far. $50 million is being allocated for the LIHTC developments in Eastern North Carolina so that they can move forward. There's about $229 million in Helene funding that is being transferred over to the Hurricane Helene Fund, but it's unallocated. There is not a mention of the remaining part of the $265 million ask from INCOR that's needed for the uninterrupted homeowner recovery for the households in the queue still waiting from Hurricane Matthew and Florence. And there's also just no explicit authority or resources given that allows INCOR to begin setting up an infrastructure for CDBG-DR and Hurricane Helene recovery under that program platform. So again, I'll be there today. I'll be following the votes and the conversations and the questions that are asked on the floor, and I will make sure to include those highlights as well in our Housing Matters this week. Since we are post-election, it's important to note that there will be several leadership changes at all levels at the North Carolina General Assembly. That includes our Speaker of the House. So we'll be releasing a quick reference to all the incoming key leaders in the North Carolina General Assembly later this week. We do know that Destin Hall is expected to become the new Speaker in the North Carolina General Assembly in January. And on the Senate side, Senator Phil Berger will continue his run as the active, longest serving chamber member in the country. Allison Riggs pulls ahead in the state Supreme Court race. So as of 9 a.m. this morning, she leads the race by about 623 votes out of a combined over 5.5 million votes cast. The North Carolina Housing Finance Agency also released their QAP, the second draft of their qualified allocation plan for 2025. It's now available on their website. Just a reminder that the QAP establishes the scoring for the upcoming year's LIHTC application. So here are a few of the significant changes from the first draft, all of which are highlighted in the document itself, but we just want to lift up some of the following. In the second draft of the 2025 QAP, there's an increase in the maximum awards to one principal from $2 million to $2.6 million. Also, the agency designated basis boost for new construction that will also apply to counties located in Hurricane Helene disaster areas will be up to 30%. And the projects that were allocated credits in cycle years 2023 and prior will also be eligible to receive an allocation of 2025 tax credits. Another revision includes that there has been a revision on the definition or really the categorization of community center and senior center. Those will now be considered as public facilities and they will no longer be a separate category. The preliminary applications submitted during the open bond cycle may use the established current rent and income limits. And then the requirements for eligible Golden Leaf counties and the list of those counties have been revised. The list of documents allowed by the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency to be considered for new construction projects expecting to receive any project-based rental assistance through Section 8 has been revised. And then properties receiving any agency funding must have agency approval of all rent increases through the extended use period. You can continue to submit your comments for the QAP, and the agency will continue to post those comments as they come in. Moving forward, highlighting again, in the call notes, you'll be able to find an infographic by FEMA that reviews the different sheltering and housing options for North Carolina survivors of Tropical Storm or Hurricane Helene. This runs through displacement assistance, rental assistance, transitional shelter assistance, all the way to home repair and disaster temporary housing. And obviously the final goal is rehousing and returning home. As of November 15th, here are some of the assistance metrics that we have from about FEMA and Helene. Over 260,000 households have signed up for FEMA individual assistance. Over $174 million in individual housing assistance has been dispersed. And of that, 502,000 or so have been in rental assistance. Over 4,500 households are in temporary shelter assistance. And of those, just over 4,000 are in North Carolina. The number equates to about 10,300 individuals approximately. So again, 4,500 households are in temporary shelter assistance due to Helene. And of these, just over 4,000 are in North Carolina. This is down from the peak, which was about 6,000. but it's still extremely high, and it speaks to the dire need. The public is also invited to comment on proposed use of state disaster mitigation funds. So the North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency, NCORE, is seeking public comments through December 14th on a proposed amendment to the action plan for administering HUD Community Development Block Grant Mitigation Funds. So this action plan amendment is intended to address homeowner mitigation needs and specifically includes establishing the Residential Property Elevation Fund. And this is going to be used to rehabilitate, reconstruct, or replace properties that are located in a floodplain or at risk of future flooding. This new fund will help protect properties against future flood damage through structural elevations and related activities. And just to be clear, this fund is separate from the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Funded Rebuild North Carolina program that focuses on homeowner recovery. This is actually separate because the Rebuild North Carolina Homeowner Recovery Program primarily serves properties that do not need home elevation. This is where you start to see where recovery and resiliency really start to go different ways. There's a recovery component to this, but resiliency is in this mitigation piece. It's in ensuring that there is protection for the risk of future flooding. The proposed changes in this mitigation plan also include changes to allocations to several different funds like the Affordable Housing Development Fund, the Public Housing Restoration Fund, Infrastructure Recovery Program, and Strategic Buyout Program. And there are several other updates. You can see both the draft of the Substantial Action Plan Amendment number 6 for mitigation on their website. We have a link to that in the call notes, as well as all the instructions on how to submit comments either by email or by mail. Again, the public comments are due and they must be submitted no later than 5 p.m. on Saturday, December 14th. Last week, HUD announced $4.8 million to support people experiencing homelessness in communities across North Carolina and South Carolina that are recovering from Hurricane Helene. Through HUD's Rapid Unsheltered Survivor Housing, or the RUSH program, funding is going to be allocated to Winston-Salem and Charlotte in North Carolina, Greenville County, Lexington County, and state of South Carolina in South Carolina to address needs not fully met by existing federal disaster relief programs. So again, these dollars allocated to these particular areas are to be used to support people experiencing homelessness in communities across the state that are recovering from Hurricane Helene. So they're not only to be used in those areas, but for this particular group recovering from Helene. The foreclosure moratorium in effect in North Carolina for certain counties and certain mortgage loan remains. So there is a 90-day foreclosure moratorium that still remains in effect for Federal Housing Administration, FHA, insured mortgages, as well as home equity conversion mortgages, HECM, in the 25 North Carolina counties that were presidentially declared a major disaster under the Stafford Act. So to be clear, it is not a moratorium on all foreclosures and does not apply to, for example, privately insured mortgage loans or other federally backed loans, such as loans purchased or securitized by the Federal Home Loan Mortgage Corporation or the Federal National Mortgage Association. If you're interested in learning more about tenant and landlord's rights, as well as eviction and housing assistance in the wake of Helene, you can check out this article from the UNC School of Government. It's very comprehensive, titled After the Storm, Summary Ejectment and Assistance Programs in North Carolina. There are a few Helene-related events that I want to lift up. In particular, tomorrow, November 20th, from 12 to 1:30, there is a virtual and town hall conversation, Western North Carolina Helene Recovery Conversation, and it's going to focus on transitioning from immediate emergency management to long-term recovery. Being hosted by the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. Again, this is tomorrow, November 20th, from 12 to 1:30 p.m. You can join the event on Zoom. We'll have the link in the call notes, or you can call in by dialing 756-7520, extension 117356, followed by the pound sign. Spanish and ASL interpretation and communication access will also be provided. And that one of the objectives is really hearing from community groups, nonprofits, and others, and also there being a share out of information and really a space to answer questions about resources and services that are available to support the ongoing storm response. Next week, there's another event. It's a hybrid event titled Mold Matters, Health and Home Safety After Helene on November 25th from 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. at the Land of Sky Association of Realtors Event Center. So if you're interested in this event, the link is also included in the call notes. There are several other local updates and events, as well as resources and news pieces, as always. So make sure you take a moment and check those out. Remember that next week there is no housing call. So we'll be back on December 3rd, and we will talk to you next time. Have a great week.